Hi, this is James from Tabletop Gaming Guild, and today we're going to take a look at SiegeStorm SiegeMode, which is a 2 to 4 player game published by Van Ryder Games. In this game, you're going to be playing a fantasy faction, and you're going to be trying to deploy your cards and deal damage to your opponent and cause all sorts of havoc to get them down to 0 cards in their deck. Once they go take their turn and they can't draw, they lose the game. Let's go ahead down to the table here. I'll give you a general overview of how the game is played, and then we're going to come back and I'm going to give you my final thoughts. Okay, so this is SiegeStorm. This is going to be like a typical setup for the 2-player game on here. A couple things to go over SiegeStorm. First is, what is SiegeStorm? SiegeStorm is a card game of a relentless assault for 1 to 4 players where armies rush forward and clash into each other's defenses, trying to deplete the forces in a brutal war of attrition. You're the commander in this game. You're forced to make difficult choices. Every card in your deck is a resource you can use in multiple different ways, deciding which way will often be risky, painful, or both. There are no card types, no counters, no dice, no numbers to remember, or complex rules to distract you from what matters most, bringing the pain to your enemies. Well, how does this game implement that? Let's see. This game has several different modes to play by. You have your Siege mode, which is what we're going to show, which is going to be the 2-player version of this game. But you also have a solo mode, a co-op mode, and a last man standing mode. We'll briefly go over those modes towards the end here, but the focus of our video is going to be on Siege mode, and it's what you need to know as the core of the game for any of the other modes too. Alright, so in this mode, duel mode, where you're going to be fighting each other, there's going to be things that you're going to have out here. You're going to have your decks. You're going to have this board here, which is going to contain your front land, no man land, and the opponent's front land, and you're going to be moving your troops along this path until they get to the end. You also can have a supporter row, so you can have cards out here, and these you can use once per turn, and you'll turn them to the side here to help pay for cards, which we'll show you in a second. And off to the side here, you'll have your casualty deck. These are going to be the amount of damage you have. You're going to be flipping cards over from the top of your deck, and that'll be your casualty deck. So that's the different zones of play in the game. You're going to play until an opponent cannot draw cards. At that point, you have won the game. And setup is just as easy as you see here. You're just going to shuffle your 34 card deck and place it here. Opponent shuffles their 34 card deck, and you place this little bar here in between vertically. You're going to decide who goes first. You can do a coin toss or however you want to do that. And then you're going to start your game. You're going to start the game. You're going to draw 2 cards. So when you draw the 2 cards, at the beginning of the game, if you don't like the 2 cards that you drew, or one of them, you can place it on the bottom of your deck and draw another, so that you have 2 cards. You can only do this once. After that, the game will start. Couple things to know before we go into what you can do on your turn is anatomy of the card itself here. So you're going to have the cost, you're going to have the card name, you're going to have its action and its passive ability, and some of the passive abilities will have costs on them. Let's see if we can find a card with a cost like this one right here. This one will have a cost on here, and you have to pay it in order to be able to use the shapeshift ability. To pay costs, you're simply just going to discard a card from the top, discard the number of cards that's on there from the top of your deck. Now, the game does come with these handy dandy reference sheets, so there's a lot of keywords in this game. You can look at this for the keywords so that you know what they are. All right, and the game here, to get your turn going here, you're going to go over certain sequences. Once you finish those sequences, it'll be the other player's turn. You're going to prepare, draw, advanced war track, deploy, maybe take a single extra turn. So if you get an extra turn, you can do it one time. If you get a second extra turn, you can't do it. So only one extra turn if you have a card that lets you do it. And then you end your turn. To prepare, you're going to be reset any of your committed cards in your support zone. So if I had cards that I used here to help pay for the cost of my other cards, I can set them back up and they're ready again to be used. I then draw 2 cards for my reserve deck. On your first turn, though, you will only draw 1. And you have a hand limit of 2. So I'll draw 2 cards. It's my first turn, so I'll draw 1. And now I have my starting hand of 3 cards. You advance the war track, so you're going to move all the creatures you have along the war track. And I'm going to show you what happens when they get to the end here. You're going to deploy. If your deployment zone is empty, you may deploy a creature and put it there. If your deployment zone is already occupied, you cannot deploy any more creatures until you advance your war track and clear the deployment zone. You may perform 1 deploy action per turn. However, you could do as many of the cards for their actions as you want on your turn, or can afford, I might say. So let's go over what all that means. All right, so for your deployment zone here, let's say I wanted to deploy one of these creatures. So there's 2 things I can do with them. I could use their action here, and like this card here, it'll cost me 2 to use its action. And if I use its action, it will simply kill 1 enemy with cost 3 or less. So I'd look to see if anyone's out there, and I could kill 1 enemy of 3 or less. This one here's action. I can move the despoiler, which is this one, from your casualties into your hand, which is really cool. And here, this one here, if there are 3 enemies, deal 5 damage, which is really cool. So maybe I want to use this one. So if I wanted to use this one, I would discard 3 cards from the top of my deck here, and I place it in my deployment zone. So this is my deployment zone. That is the opponent's deployment zone. Any abilities that the character has, which down here are available while it's out, and some of them are passive, like this one here will happen all the time. If I put it out, it'll be all enemies have -1 attack, which is really, really cool. And the opponent will put one out here. Let's say the opponent put this one out. And on subsequent turns, every turn, this thing's going to move up. Once it gets to the end here, you have to make a decision. So on the phase where this is here and it moves out, you're going to need to pick between 3 different things. You can storm, hold ground, or support. If you support, it's super easy. Just flip this card over here. And it's now going to be able to be used to, let's say I wanted to play this web spinner. Instead of paying 2, I could turn this to pay for 1 of them and then flip another card over to do that. The other thing I can do is storm. I look at its attack power and I subtract the defense of the other creature that's across from it. So in this case, this would be down to 3 attack. If I target the player directly, they'll have to discard the 3 cards. That is the difference. And that's going to be their damage. I could also target a creature. I can target any of the creatures on their frontline no man land and stuff like that and get rid of them. If I do target one of those creatures and there's more damage than needed to be dealt for it because their defense was so much, then that damage is lost. It doesn't like overflow to anything else. The other thing you can do is hold ground. If I hold ground, I could place my creature in my front line or my no man's land. If I do that, then the creature I'll be able to continually use its ability, which is nice. If I have one in no man's land and I want to replace it on my front line, I would just put that card into my casualties pile. And that's why your opponent may want to target those, because they want to get rid of those passive abilities that are causing so much trouble to them. In essence, that's all you're going to be doing for the 2-player game. All the strategy is in the abilities of these cards, what cards you play out, how fast you deplete this deck, and what synergies that you can make. A couple things to note. The base box comes with 2 factions, and in the 2 factions, so 2 players, you have to get more expansions to be able to play more players. They have different backings so that you can tell the difference between the different factions. And in general also, not in general also, if you see the symbol way, let's see if it gets into focus here. If you see the symbol way down on the bottom, if it's green, then that means it's part of the starter deck. If it's white, it's going to be one of the cards that you can use in deck creation. So we'll go over deck creation now. There's another symbol in there that that's like booster packs and stuff like that, but you'll have to pick them up separately. But just know that if you're starting out here, just take all the cards with the symbol that's green here to make your 34 deck. And that's really nice. I love that they did that because a lot of your CCGs, well, this is a living card game. It's not really CCG, but a lot of the games like this, they don't bother to really mark what a starter card is. Instead, they'll have like a list of cards that you're supposed to pull out at the back of the book. That's a little bit of pain to keep doing, especially if you want to play some of these advanced modes and then have a new player come in and play the same game. You don't really necessarily want to have to reset this every time. So that's that mode. You're going to continue on until someone is out of cards completely. Once they're out of cards completely, that person will lose the game, the other person wins. Let's briefly talk about the other modes that you can have in this game. All right, so solo mode. This is basically the idea of your setup. You're going to have a solo mode. You're still going to have this lane combat here. You're going to have this right side be for you, and this left side here is going to be for the AI boss here. And what you're going to do is you're going to pick the difficulty of your boss. So let's go ahead and show you that for setup. You'll pick the difficulty of your boss, and there's going to be 3 different cards that come with the base game. You're going to have medium, hard, and very hard. And you're going to pick which one you want. So let's say we take a look at medium here. So if we take a look at medium, you're going to see the victory conditions. This one here, you're going to get the life points reduced to 0, or you're going to deplete his resources. That's the 2 different ways of defeating him. This is the card count that they'll be flipped for this boss every turn. When any of the, I don't want to say Bylos's allies storm, increase the menace level by 1. So, as you know, that you, when you're playing, have to discard cards from your deck equal to the number that you need to use to play a card. Well, these bosses are a little different. When they flip over cards, if their menace level is high enough, they can play the card. So they could play 3 and less right now. So beyond that, you're going to pick one of the 2 decks. There's 2 decks that come with this game. You have Evil Goblins, and you have the Spectral deck here. So you're going to pick one of the 2 monster decks. So let's say we did Evil Goblins, and I'm going to show you the Spectral deck real quick because it's just cool. There's all sorts of really cool monsters you can run into, and you'll notice that these ones are sort of like simplified monsters. So they have a icon up here, they have an attack, and they have a defense. And sometimes they have these passive abilities that fire off, and sometimes they'll have storm abilities. But they're pretty cool in the fact that they're simplified and easy to play with. So if we're going to play with, like, say, the Evil Goblins, we will take out this reference card, because that'll go to you as a player, and we'll shuffle up this deck. You're going to set your health counter, which is that axe up there, and you're going to put out that token. All right, so after this deck here is shuffled, we'll place it over here. Oops. We'll place it over here, and we are ready to play. Okay, just to be clear, I did skip a step in the setup in here. Just so you know, you actually flip this card over, and this will show you the setup of the game. So this is solo, this is multiplayer. This is, so the co-op mod is basically this. You just increase the difficulty here. This is going to be how many common, this is going to be how many of the more advanced cards that you're going to have when you set up that deck that you picked. And this is going to be a starting menace. So this easier one's going to be starting its menace at 2. And this is its starting health, which will be 25. So just get rid of that question on what the setup is, that's how you set it up. All right, so the boss here is always going to go first, and you're going to take a look at what their card count is for their hand. You're going to flip over that many cards. So I have 3 cards. Well, that's not great. And then you're going to play everything that you can in that. So these are all zeros. So this boss could play them all. Now, if you ever flipped over the hand count and the boss couldn't play it, you automatically raise the menace level. Any cards that don't get played get put into a reserved pile over here or wherever you want to put it. That is not your discard pile or your casualties pile. That is just the cards that weren't played. They are discarded, but they're in a separate pile. And what do you do with this boss? Because you know what you're going to do on your turn. But what does the boss do on its turn? Well, like I said, you're going to look to see if you could play any of these cards. So you're going to look at your threat level. And then you're going to try to play these cards. Now, each of these cards are going to need to go in a specific order. And you're going to go from the highest deploy down, but you're going to look at the command that they do. So if I look at these, let's say, these Goblin Archers, they're going to deploy or special gang rule here. So deploy here, if I look at deploy to the boss's deployment zone. Gang, place a single gang token on all allies and discard this card. Each gang token has +1 attack. So it's not going to gang right now because there's no one there, so it's going to go in the front line. This one here has the symbol of this right here, and this is leader. Deploy to the front line or to no man's land. So this guy right here, leader, and it's going to have a passive ability. Each time you deploy an ally, place 1 of your gang tokens on them. So it's just going to basically pump up your people, and you get a nice stack of gang tokens with the game. So I can put this on my front line, and basically this card here is going to help power up my players. I couldn't play it in a different order because this one has the higher value. So this one won't get the bonus here, and this one here is deploy or special gang ability. So this one here, I would go ahead and use its gang ability. It would go into the boss's discard pile, and this guy here would get powered up. And like I said, if you didn't play with a card, then it would go to the reserve pile, and then you would take your turn. And these are all the different abilities. So the other thing I could run into here is action. Play an action only on the card, and it cannot be deployed. So you're just going to play the action, it's going to be discarded. And then I have shielded. Creatures are immune from all enemy actions and abilities. So, like I said, as the game goes by, you're either going to defeat this boss, or the boss is going to defeat your deck. Or the boss is going to deplete your deck, and you're going to lose the game. And again, each of the bosses, you're going to look at the card here to see what the victory conditions are and what the menace effects are. So, the boss, as time goes by, this menace level is going to get up. If it gets up to 5, it's whatever comes out, it can deploy and use. So in a quick nutshell, that's what's going to be solo and basically cooperative mode. So in cooperative mode, you're just going to have a bigger deck of more stuff, and to cover the number of players, and the boss's health will be a little higher. So that's solo and cooperative. The last mode I briefly want to talk about is going to be the last man standing mode. The last man standing mode is just basically you can play up to 4 players, and all it is simply you're going to set these up and you're going to point them to an opponent, and you're going to do your basically attacking and defending from your left to right. So you will be attacking your opponent here from your left, and you'll be attacking your opponent there from the right. And there's a couple extra steps for that. You're going to be basically going to be able to draw 3 cards instead of your 2 cards. You're going to have more cards to play with. Actions and passive abilities only affect the war track in which they are played, so keep that in mind because you're going to have 2 different war tracks you're dealing with. And whenever a player is defeated, remove all the eliminated player's cards from the game and put all of his opponent's card in their owner's casualty piles. Remove the empty battle zone and players continue with the remaining players. To win, simply outlast all of your other opponents. So that's basically it. That's how you're going to do the last man standing 3 to 4 player version of this game. Only other things I wanted to mention in this is going to be each of the 2 decks that you get in the game have a nice healthy stack of cards here that you can use for deck creation in the game. And these cards here, based on their color, so here's going to be like a common card and here's going to be like an advanced card, you're going to be limited to the number of cards. I believe you're going to have in your 34 card deck, you can have up to 4 copies of the common cards and only 2 copies of the more advanced cards. And there's a lot of different synergies and cool stuff that you can do with the game. Other quick notes are basically everything that you need is going to be on these little cards here, but on the back of the book, you can see here is just a handy dandy rules reference on there. That's basically all that you need for the game. This type of game here, you only have to play it basically a couple rounds, a couple turns really, and you got the game. So that's really quick learning, really nice in that aspect. And that is a quick overview of how you're going to be playing SiegeStorm. Let's go up to the table here and I'll give you my final thoughts on this game. Okay, SiegeStorm SiegeMode is a solid duel game. Now, a couple caveats in this. If you get the retail version, which is what I have of the game, you don't have enough to play anything beyond the 2-player version of the game. So you can play 2-player cooperative, you can play 2-player duel, or you can play the solo mode of the game. So on to just going over the duel mode of the game. The duel mode is really fun. The decks are really well balanced and they're very asymmetric for the starter decks themselves. And there's enough cards in here that let you customize your deck pretty much any way that you may want to, within the idea that they still fit in the theme of that faction. So that's fun. The solo mode, you have the 1 boss on there. That's pretty cool too. You have 3 difficulties in that. So the multiplayer, you only have the 2 decks. It's really not a thing for this. So where that gets into how this works for replayability is your replayability is going to be pretty decent because there's a lot of synergy that you can learn through the 2 different decks, but at a certain point you're going to know those decks and you're going to want to move on because they're highly themed asymmetric decks. So if you end up liking SiegeStorm, you're going to probably need to go out and get some of the expansions on there so you can play more of the bosses when you play the solo mode. You can play different factions when you play the duel mode, and you can be able to play the multiplayer mode. Now this does come with enough boards to support the multiplayer mode. It just doesn't come enough decks to support the multiplayer mode in this box, which is fine. The game really shines on its duel mode here, so the 2-player combat on there, and the solo is pretty good too. So overall, if you're looking for, I would say, a 2-player combat game, this is one that you're going to want to check out because it is a lot of fun, and I really like the different strategies that you can employ with the different factions. So that's really cool too. And the art is really nice in this game. I really like the art. And I also like the fact that this game is very simple to teach. There's not a whole lot that you need to go over to get the game going. And it's very intuitive in having just to discard those cards. Once you explain that concept, or you pay for them by discarding from the deck, but the deck is also your life, it becomes very fluid. And I really like how fast it moves. And I also like that in general, you have 3 turns before bad stuff really starts happening to you in this game. So it gives a nice little build up for your initial strategy in the game too. So like I said, overall I like this game. That's where it's going to fit if you are looking for a dual like a dueling card game, this is one you're going to want to check out. And that's my thoughts on SiegeStorm. Thank you for watching.